to new adventures.
Cheers to that.
The entrance is just ahead. Stay alert. Sister! Everyone, back up now!
They're moving!
Ava Lambert's life changed forever when she was a child. Her father, a famous zoologist, was betrayed by his close colleague Edgar Holt, who stole his groundbreaking research. Edgar's betrayal led to Ava's father's mysterious death, leaving her with nothing but anger. As she grew up, Ava's desire for revenge burned deep inside her. She spent years researching the men involved and finally found them living a life of success built on her father's stolen work. Ava decided it was time to make them pay. She didn't just want to confront them. She wanted to make them feel the same fear her father must have felt before he died. Disguising herself as a fellow researcher, she infiltrated their camp. But Ava didn't come for a simple confrontation. She came with a plan that involved one of the deadliest creatures her father had ever studied. The plan was simple: get close to them, and then let nature's fury take over. Ava didn't carry a weapon, but what she did bring was more terrifying than any gun or knife. An anaconda, a creature she knew well from her father's research. She waited for the right moment to strike, knowing that the moment she released the snake, everything would change forever. The men who had destroyed her life would face the consequences of their betrayal, and Ava would finally get the revenge she had been seeking for years. This wasn't just about making them pay. It was about restoring her father's legacy and making sure no one could take advantage of it ever again. Ava had always felt driven by a deep need for justice. When she discovered that Anthony Walker, her father's old friend, had been part of the betrayal, she was devastated. Anthony had been one of the men who helped cover up her father's death, pretending it was an accident. For years, Ava had believed that Anthony was an innocent bystander, someone who had been caught up in the deceit unknowingly. But when she uncovered the truth, she realized he had played a major role in her father's downfall. Determined to confront him, Ava learned that Anthony had become a wealthy man, thanks to the stolen research her father had spent years working on. He had moved on from the betrayal, enjoying the riches and fame that came from exploiting her father's legacy. Ava couldn't allow him to get away with it any longer. She knew that if she was going to make him pay, she had to act carefully. Ava spent weeks planning her move. She used her father's old notes to gather information about the wildlife Anthony had been involved with, knowing that it would be key to getting close to him. When the time was right, she found a way to enter his world, pretending to be an expert in the same field. But all the while, her mind was set on one thing: revenge. In the final moments, she let Anthony believe that he had once again outsmarted her. But Ava had been planning all along, and when she finally revealed her true intentions, it was too late for him to escape the consequences. Ava had always been a quiet observer of the world around her, but the betrayal of her father had turned her into someone who could no longer sit idle. She had heard stories about Josh Monroe, a man who had once been close to her father. Josh was the kind of person who could charm anyone, and he had always seemed trustworthy. But when Ava discovered that Josh had used her father's research to build his own fortune, she was shattered. The man she had once admired had played a huge part in the betrayal. Ava knew she had to confront Josh, but she also understood that it wouldn't be easy. He was powerful and well-connected, and he had likely forgotten about the small, innocent girl he once knew. But Ava had grown stronger over the years, and she had learned how to use her knowledge to her advantage. Her father's research gave her the perfect opportunity to get close to Josh without raising suspicion. She waited patiently, watching as Josh continued to live the life her father should have had. Ava's plan was methodical. She would get him to trust her, allow him to believe she was simply interested in his work, and then strike when he least expected it. Her weapon wasn't a knife or a gun. It was the very thing that had been part of her father's legacy, the knowledge of how to control the deadly creatures her father had once studied. When Josh finally let his guard down, Ava knew it was time. She released an anaconda on him, knowing that it would be the final act of justice for her father. As Josh screamed, Ava realized that she had finally found peace. Ava's journey for revenge was not only about the men who betrayed her father, but also about the ones who pretended to be loyal while secretly exploiting him. Michael Davis had once been a close ally of her father's, someone Ava had trusted. But when her father died, Michael disappeared from her life, only to return years later as a powerful businessman who had built his empire on her father's stolen work. It was a bitter pill to swallow for Ava, who had once considered Michael a mentor. She couldn't believe that the man she had admired was one of the betrayers. But once she found out the truth, she knew there would be no turning back. Michael had no idea that Ava had been following his every move, watching him from the shadows as he continued to live his life of luxury, funded by her father's research. Ava knew exactly what he had done, and it was time to make him feel the weight of his actions. Ava had spent years preparing for this moment. She had become an expert in the art of deception and used her father's research to get close to Michael without raising any suspicion. She posed as a fellow researcher, eager to join his team. Michael welcomed her with open arms, not realizing that she was the one person who would bring everything crashing down. When the moment came, Ava's plan unfolded with deadly precision. She released the Anaconda in a secluded area where Michael thought he was safe. It was a calculated move. No one could survive the terror of being trapped by one of the deadliest creatures. As Michael realized his fate, Ava watched without mercy. She had avenged her father, and with that, she found the justice she had been seeking for years. Ava had always been careful, calculating every step of her revenge. But there was one man she had overlooked, Luke Carter, her father's former protege. Ava had trusted Luke once. He had worked side by side with her father, and Ava had even looked up to him as an older brother. But when her father died, Luke's betrayal became clear. He had helped Edgar Holt cover up the truth, even going so far as to silence anyone who suspected foul play. Ava's first instinct was to confront him directly, but she knew that wouldn't work. Luke had become a powerful man in his own right, and Ava would have to get closer to him before making her move. She studied his every action, waiting for the right moment to strike. When she discovered that Luke had been trying to sell the last of her father's research, it was the final straw. Ava couldn't allow him to continue profiting from her father's work. She went to great lengths to track him down, making sure she was always one step ahead. Ava knew that the only way to catch Luke off guard was to make him think she had no idea about his involvement in the betrayal. She posed as a naive researcher, eager to learn from someone as accomplished as Luke. When Ava finally met him in person, she kept her composure, hiding the fury that burned inside. She knew it would take time to earn his trust, but once she did, there would be no escaping the consequences. Ava carefully orchestrated their next meeting, luring Luke into the perfect trap. The moment he let his guard down, Ava unleashed the Anaconda, a creature he had once studied with her father. Luke had no idea that his past had come back to haunt him in the form of the very thing he had once helped to exploit. Ava had learned over the years that revenge wasn't about rushing in blindly. It was about waiting for the perfect moment. She had already confronted many of the men who had betrayed her father, but the one person who had eluded her was Edgar Holt. Edgar was the man who had started everything, the mastermind behind her father's death and the theft of his research. He had moved on, becoming a respected figure in the scientific community, but Ava knew that his success was built on lies. Ava had been planning for years, and now the time had come to confront Edgar. She knew that he would never expect her to be the one to bring him down. Over time, she had carefully studied his habits, learned where he would be at certain times, and waited for the right opportunity to strike. Edgar was always surrounded by people, confident that no one would dare challenge him. But Ava knew better. She was no longer the innocent girl who had lost her father. She was someone who had learned to fight back, someone who had the knowledge to make him pay for what he had done. Ava didn't need a weapon. She had something far more terrifying. She knew how to control the Anaconda, a creature her father had studied closely. This would be the ultimate revenge, and Edgar wouldn't know what hit him. Ava had set the perfect trap. She invited Edgar to a secluded meeting place, pretending to be someone who wanted to collaborate with him. When he arrived, unaware of the danger lurking nearby, Ava made her move. She released the snake, knowing that Edgar's life would end as painfully as her father's had. For Ava, this was the moment of justice she had been waiting for. Ava had spent years tracking down the people who had betrayed her father, but none of them knew just how much she had changed. Once a young girl filled with grief and confusion, she had now become someone who could get close to anyone, learn their secrets, and plan her revenge with cold precision. The men who had destroyed her life were unaware that they were already trapped in her web. Ava's patience had been tested, but now, as she watched each of them from the shadows, she knew that their time was running out. The most dangerous of all was Edgar Holt. He had not only stolen her father's research, but had also manipulated the entire scientific community. Ava had learned everything she needed to know about him and his habits. She understood his arrogance, his belief that he was untouchable. But Ava had spent years preparing for this moment. She had outwitted him at every turn, gaining his trust while secretly plotting his downfall. Edgar's betrayal went deeper than Ava had ever realized. He had ruined her father's reputation, destroyed his legacy, and had turned the scientific world against him. But now Ava had the upper hand. She had become the one thing Edgar never thought she would be, his equal. When she finally revealed her true identity, Edgar realized he had underestimated her. But by then it was too late. Ava had set everything in motion. She unleashed the Anaconda, a creature her father had once studied, to exact the final revenge. Edgar's screams were the last sound Ava heard before she knew that justice had been served. Ava had known all along that revenge would not come easily. Each man she confronted had been careful, hiding behind their wealth and power. But there was one man she had underestimated, Theo Harris, a man who had been both a mentor and a rival to her father. Theo had always been the one to push her father further in his work, but when the time came, he had shown his true colors. Theo had turned on her father, helping Edgar Holt in the final stages of the betrayal. Ava's trust in him had been shattered, and she now understood just how deeply he had been involved. For years, Theo had continued his work, building his career off the back of her father's research. He thought he had escaped the consequences of his actions, but Ava had been quietly waiting for the right moment. She had studied his life, his movements, and knew exactly when he would be most vulnerable. Theo had become too comfortable in his position, convinced that no one would dare challenge him. He had forgotten about Ava, the girl who had lost everything. Ava's plan was simple but effective. She would get close to Theo, pretending to be interested in collaborating on a new project. He wouldn't suspect a thing. The moment she gained his trust, she would use everything her father had taught her about the deadly creatures he studied. She carefully placed herself in a position where Theo would be alone, thinking that he was safe. But the moment Theo let his guard down, Ava unleashed the one thing he feared most, an anaconda. The creature struck with the precision Ava had learned over the years, and Theo's life ended as brutally as her father's had. Ava had always believed that the people who betrayed her father would eventually be punished for their actions, but she never imagined how satisfying that revenge would feel. After discovering the true extent of the betrayal, she realized just how deeply her father's work had been exploited. Each of the men involved had gotten away with their crimes, living their lives as if they hadn't destroyed everything she had ever known. But Ava knew that it was only a matter of time before their world came crashing down. The final piece of the puzzle was Nicholas Reed, a man who had been involved in the sale of her father's research. Nicholas was slick, charming, and had made a fortune off the work that her father had spent years perfecting. He had avoided Ava's gaze for years, always hiding behind the protection of his wealth and power. But Ava had watched him carefully, and she knew exactly how to bring him to justice. Nicholas thought that he had escaped his past, but Ava was about to prove him wrong. She used her knowledge of the wildlife her father had studied to get close to him. Posing as a fellow researcher, she convinced him that she was looking for collaboration. Nicholas, thinking he was in control, welcomed her with open arms. But the truth was, Ava was playing a dangerous game of deception, and Nicholas was about to lose. When the time came, Ava made her move. She released the anaconda in the quiet of the night, knowing that Nicholas would never see it coming. As the creature closed in, Ava watched, knowing that this was the final act of justice for her father. Nicholas's screams echoed in the night, a reminder that no one could escape the consequences of betrayal. Ava had been waiting for this moment her entire life. The men who had taken everything from her, who had stolen her father's legacy and destroyed her family, were now facing their reckoning. Each one of them had gotten away with their crimes for far too long, living in luxury and security while Ava had lived with the pain of betrayal. But the time for vengeance had arrived, and Ava was prepared to make them all pay. The final confrontation came when Ava cornered the last man on her list, Edgar Holt. He had once been the one who made all the decisions, the one who had manipulated everyone to get what he wanted. Edgar had never expected Ava to come back, let alone seek revenge. He had forgotten about the girl who had witnessed the destruction of her world. But Ava had never forgotten. She had spent years planning, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ava didn't come with a weapon. She didn't need one. What she had was far more dangerous, the knowledge her father had shared with her about the deadly creatures he studied. She knew how to control them, how to use them to bring down her enemies. She led Edgar into a secluded area, under the pretense of a final meeting to discuss their past. But what Edgar didn't know was that this meeting would be his last. Ava released the Anaconda, the very creature that had once been a symbol of her father's work. As the snake coiled around Edgar, Ava knew that justice had finally been served. There was no escape for him, no last-minute plea for mercy. He had made his bed, and now he would lie in it. For Ava, the moment was bittersweet. Revenge had been achieved, but it could never bring back what she had lost.